The first strike. It was a day like any other for the crew of the human colony on the remote planet of Hesperus IV, a small settlement on the edge of known space. It was more of a research outpost than a military base. The humans had only begun to establish themselves here, and their presence was barely a blip on the radar of the vast, galaxy-spanning civilizations that ruled the stars. But that was about to change. The Zorak, a ruthless and technologically superior alien race, had been monitoring the human colonies for some time. They viewed humans as primitive, insignificant beings, weak and unable to pose a real threat to their power. For years, the Zorak had spread their influence, conquering planets with ease. They believed that humanity would be no different. Without warning, the skies above Hesperus IV darkened. The once peaceful blue planet now faced an impending storm. Ships, massive and menacing, descended from the heavens like harbingers of doom. The Zorak's attack force was formidable. Their ships gleamed with cold, cruel efficiency, their weapons designed to strike terror into the hearts of any civilization they targeted. The humans had no time to react. Their outpost was barely equipped to defend itself against a full-scale invasion, let alone one of this magnitude. The first strike came fast and hard, a volley of energy beams that sliced through the atmosphere, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. Buildings crumbled, the ground shook, and the air was filled with the sounds of chaos. Captain Sarah Winters, commander of the colony, watched in horror as her people scrambled to find cover. The Zorak ships circled overhead like vultures, their weapons firing at will, showing no mercy. Sarah's heart raced. She had prepared for this day, but the reality of it was far worse than she had ever imagined. "Activate the shields. Get the civilians to the bunkers," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. But there was no time to organize a defense. The first wave of the Zorak assault had already done its damage. Sarah's thoughts raced as she ran through the command center. What had gone wrong? Why had the Zorak attacked so suddenly? The humans weren't a threat. They weren't even fully established here. This was a scientific outpost, not a military installation. Yet, the Zorak had targeted it with brutal precision. It was as if they knew exactly where to strike. As she looked out the window, Sarah saw the Zorak ships fire another round of devastating blasts. The colony was on the brink of collapse. Yet, despite the overwhelming firepower of the Zorak, there was something odd about their attack. The destruction was severe, but it wasn't like the Zorak to waste resources on such a small, unimportant outpost. They had always chosen their battles carefully, calculating every move to maximize their gain. But this seemed different. Before Sarah could give another order, an alarm blared through the base. A small, unmarked ship had just entered the atmosphere, heading directly toward the heart of the Zorak fleet. It was a human ship, one of the last to arrive at the colony. Sarah's pulse quickened. This ship wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't a military vessel, just a civilian transport carrying some of the colony's last supplies. The ship was unarmed and fragile, yet it was heading straight into the heart of the enemy's attack. It didn't make sense. "Who is piloting that ship?" Sarah demanded. The control officer frantically tapped his console. "It's Captain Lee Jordan. He's a civilian pilot, Mom. He's not supposed to be anywhere near this area." Sarah couldn't believe it. The ship was headed directly toward the Zorak forces. The pilots had no chance against such overwhelming power. But something told her that there was more to this than met the eye. Captain Jordan had always been a bit of a maverick, known for pushing the boundaries and taking risks. But this was madness. With no time to spare, Sarah grabbed a comm unit and ordered, "Get that ship out of there. We can't afford to lose another ship." But it was too late. The Zorak noticed the incoming vessel almost immediately. They opened fire on it, their energy beams cutting through the atmosphere. The civilian ship was quickly overwhelmed, its fragile hull unable to withstand the attack. Sarah's heart sank as she watched the ship explode in a fireball in the sky. But then something happened that she did not expect. From the wreckage of the destroyed ship, A strange signal began to pulse through the air. It was weak, barely detectable, but unmistakable. Sarah narrowed her eyes, trying to make sense of it. The signal was not just any distress beacon. It was a message, encoded with a sophisticated encryption the Zorak had never seen before. Someone had deliberately left it for the Zorak to find. Someone had planned this. The realization hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. The Zorak had made a grave mistake. They had attacked not just any colony, but one with secrets they hadn't bargained for, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their conquest. As the last remnants of the Zorak's fleet loomed above, Sarah's mind raced. This was no random attack. The Zorak had provoked the wrong species, and they had no idea what kind of power they had just unleashed. The colony's defenses were in ruins. The Zorak had left nothing but destruction in their wake, and the few survivors were struggling to regroup in the bunkers. The once proud human outpost had been reduced to rubble, but Captain Sarah Winters had one thing on her mind: the signal. The mysterious transmission from the wreckage of Captain Lee Jordan's ship still echoed in her mind. The Zorak had failed to understand the significance of what they had destroyed, but Sarah knew better. There was a hidden message embedded in that signal, and it was a message that would change everything. In the command center, Sarah gathered her remaining officers. She paced in front of them, trying to calm her racing thoughts. They were surrounded, and the Zorak's relentless assault was far from over. Yet deep down, Sarah could feel something she hadn't expected: hope. "Captain," one of her officers, Lieutenant Malik, spoke up hesitantly. "What do we do now? The Zorak are out there, and we're all but finished. How do we fight back?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She didn't know how they could fight back. The Zorak had more ships, more firepower, and far more experience. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play here, something bigger than any of them could understand. "We don't have time to think small," Sarah finally said, her voice steady but urgent. "We're not just fighting for this colony. We're fighting for everything. We need to decode that message. Fast." She nodded at Malik, signaling him to retrieve the encryption module. It was an old piece of equipment, but it was the best they had. The Zorak might have thought the signal was weak, but Sarah knew it was far more than just a distress call. The ship had been deliberately sabotaged, its destruction carefully orchestrated to send a message. Malik worked quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. The rest of the officers watched in tense silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. The Zorak were still out there, their ships looming ominously overhead. They were only waiting for the right moment to strike again. But Sarah couldn't afford to wait. She needed answers. After what felt like an eternity, Malik's face lit up with the glow of a breakthrough. The encrypted message was finally decoded. "Captain, it's not just a distress signal," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It's a warning." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. A warning. Malik nodded, pulling up the decrypted message on the main screen. It read, "To all human colonies, the Zorak are coming. Do not underestimate them, but do not fear them either. The true strength of humanity lies in what you don't yet know." The words were cryptic, but the meaning was clear. Someone had been watching the Zorak for far longer than Sarah could have imagined. Someone knew about the Zorak's plans, and had gone to great lengths to prepare humanity for the inevitable conflict. But who? And why had this person sent the message in such a covert manner? Why destroy the ship, causing so much death and destruction, just to send a single warning? "That's not all," Malik continued, his voice now filled with urgency. "There's more, hidden coordinates at the end of the message. It's pointing to a location far beyond our current range. It's a deep space installation. This isn't just a colony outpost. This is a staging point. This is where humanity's true weapon lies." Sarah's heart raced. A weapon. Something humanity had hidden away. Could this be the key to turning the tide of the war? Could it be the very thing that would save them from the might of the Zorak? "We're going there," Sarah said decisively, her mind already spinning with plans. "Prepare a ship. We'll take a small crew. If this is what I think it is, then it's our only chance to survive." The officers exchanged nervous glances. It was a dangerous move. The Zorak would be on them at any moment. But Sarah's resolve was clear. They had no other option. If humanity's true strength was hidden in deep space, then they had to find it before the Zorak could wipe them all out. As they prepared to leave, Sarah's mind raced with questions. Who had sent the warning? Why had they destroyed the ship instead of simply delivering the message? Was there a larger plan at play here, something the humans had yet to uncover? She couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stumbled into something far bigger than they could understand, something that could either save humanity or destroy them all. The crew of the small, battered ship boarded in silence. The hum of the engines filled the air, and Sarah could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Every moment that passed brought them closer to the truth, and closer to the terrifying possibility that humanity's survival depended on something far beyond their reach. As they sailed toward the coordinates hidden in the message, the Zorak fleet loomed overhead, unaware of the danger that was quietly building beneath their feet. They had made a fatal mistake in declaring war on the wrong species, but what they didn't know was that the true strength of humanity wasn't just in their ships or weapons. It was in something far deeper and far more dangerous. The small crew, barely enough to operate the ship, huddled in the dimly lit cockpit. The glow of the navigation screen reflected off their tired faces. There was no turning back now. The coordinates they had uncovered pointed to a distant sector of space, far beyond their current reach, and the Zorak were still out there, circling like predators waiting for their moment. Captain Sarah Winters sat in the captain's chair, her hands gripping the armrests as her eyes locked on the holographic display before her. Every part of her body was tense, on high alert. The weight of the decision to head into the unknown was pressing heavily on her chest. If this deep space installation truly held the weapon they needed to defeat the Zorak, they had to find it. But if it was a trap, then they were walking into their doom. "We're entering the coordinates now, Captain," Lieutenant Malik said, his voice steady but betraying the underlying tension. His fingers danced over the console, setting their course into the uncharted depths of space. "It'll take us about 4 hours to get there, assuming the Zorak don't find us first." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to think about the danger. The crew relied on her to lead them, to keep them focused, and to keep their hopes alive. She looked around at her team, each of them looking just as weary and anxious as she felt, but there was something else in their eyes. Resolve. They weren't just following orders. They were fighting for survival, for the future of humanity. "Keep your eyes open," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "We're not alone out here. Stay sharp." The journey was slow and uneventful, the hum of the engines their only company. As they traveled further into deep space, the stars seemed to grow more distant, swallowed by the vastness of the void. It felt like they were drifting into nothingness, but Sarah knew they were heading into something far more dangerous. As the hours passed, the sense of dread grew heavier. The ship's sensors scanned the area constantly, but so far, there were no signs of the Zorak fleet. Despite their enemies' overwhelming numbers, it was clear that the Zorak were not interested in chasing down a small, barely armed human vessel. Not yet, at least. But Sarah knew better than to underestimate them. "Captain," Malik spoke up again, his voice quieter now. "I've been analyzing the signal we decoded. There's something strange about it. The message wasn't just a warning. It's almost like it's part of a larger plan. This weapon, whatever it is, it wasn't just meant to defeat the Zorak. It's meant to shift the balance of power in the entire galaxy." "Shift the balance," Sarah repeated, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Malik continued, tapping a few more keys. "The Zorak didn't just attack us for no reason. They're an empire built on power, conquest, and control. They see humanity as weak, primitive, but this weapon, if it's real, could threaten everything they've worked for. This could make the Zorak as vulnerable as they've made us. The realization hit Sarah like a thunderclap. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about turning the tide of the entire galactic war. If humanity truly possessed a weapon capable of taking down the Zorak, it would change everything. The balance of power in the galaxy would shift, and the Zorak would no longer be the unquestioned rulers. They would become the hunted. Then we have to find it, Sarah said, her voice filled with a new urgency. And we have to find it before the Zorak do. Because once they realize what's out here, they won't hesitate to destroy it. The tension aboard the ship was palpable now. They were no longer just a small group of survivors. They were part of something much bigger. Sarah could feel the weight of history pressing on her shoulders. The lives of billions, of an entire species, might rest on what they found in this distant, forgotten corner of space. As the hours ticked by, the crew grew more restless, the uncertainty weighing heavily on them. The silence of space, so vast and cold, seemed to swallow them whole. The stars outside their viewports were like distant ghosts, fading into the dark abyss. But then, just as the ship crossed into the outer reaches of the designated coordinates, the sensors began to blare. A red warning light flashed on the main screen. "Captain," Malik shouted, his fingers flying over the console. "We're not alone. There's a ship nearby. No sign of Zorak. This one is human." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A human ship. Here, in the middle of nowhere. The chances of encountering another human vessel in this remote part of the galaxy were nearly impossible. And yet here it was. "Is it a distress signal?" she asked, her voice steady despite the racing thoughts in her mind. "No," Malik replied, his brow furrowing as he studied the readings. It's not sending anything, but it's drifting. And it's coming from the direction of the coordinates." Sarah's instincts kicked in. Could this ship be part of the deep space installation? Had someone else found the coordinates and made it here first? "We need to investigate," Sarah ordered. "Prepare a boarding party. We'll check it out. Stay on high alert." As the ship drew closer to the drifting human vessel, Sarah couldn't help but feel the tension grow. Was this a friend or foe? What secrets did this ship hold, and what did it mean for their mission? The moment they boarded the other vessel, they would know. But Sarah had the sinking feeling that whatever they found inside, it would be far more than they were prepared for. The countdown had begun, and they were about to uncover the truth behind the weapon, and the Zorak's true intentions. The crew aboard the Falcon's wing stood in uneasy silence as the docking bay doors hissed open. The eerie hum of the drifting human vessel was the only sound that broke the stillness. Its hull was worn and battered, clearly abandoned for years, possibly even decades. Despite its age, the ship showed signs of advanced technology, far more sophisticated than what the average human ship should have been capable of. Sarah Winters led the boarding party, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor as they stepped into the darkened interior. The air inside was stale, tinged with a faint smell of rust and age. The flicker of malfunctioning lights illuminated the vast, empty hallways, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. "Stay sharp," Sarah ordered, her voice low but firm. Her hand instinctively rested on the hilt of her sidearm as her eyes scanned the surroundings. Every corner, every hallway seemed to conceal secrets, and they were determined to uncover them. The airlock had been silent when they first boarded, but now the faint hum of the ship's internal systems could be heard. It was powered up, but just barely. There was no sign of life, yet the ship's heartbeat was still there, thrumming beneath their feet. "Anything on the sensors, Malik?" Sarah asked, glancing back at her lieutenant, who was busy analyzing the ship's systems. Malik's fingers danced across the small interface on his wrist, his eyes focused on the blinking display. "We're getting readings, Captain. Life support is functioning at minimal capacity. No signs of active life forms, but there are encrypted files all over this ship. Whoever was here didn't leave quietly. It's like they were trying to hide something." Sarah's gut twisted. This wasn't just an abandoned ship. It was a ship that had been deliberately left in a state of hiding. Someone had wanted to erase their presence from the galaxy. Keep looking, Sarah urged. Find me the command center. They moved deeper into the ship, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The halls grew narrower, darker, until they finally reached what could only be the bridge. The door hissed open with a mechanical groan, revealing a room that was long abandoned but still relatively intact. Control panels were flickering in and out of life, their screens cracked, but still showing traces of information. Sarah stepped inside, her boots making a dull thud against the floor. The room was eerily quiet, save for the low hum of failing technology. "Captain," Malik's voice interrupted the silence, breaking Sarah from her thoughts. "You need to see this." She turned to him, her heart pounding. Malik was standing near the central console, a holographic display illuminating his face. He was staring at something with disbelief. "Is that possible?" he whispered. Sarah stepped closer. On the screen was a star chart, and at its center was a series of coordinates. They looked familiar, too familiar. They were the same coordinates they had followed to this ship, but that wasn't the most unsettling part. It was the message that accompanied the coordinates. Location: the vault. Final entry: Project Genesis, Phase 2. Project Genesis, Sarah murmured under her breath. It sounded like something out of a myth, a long-forgotten project buried in history, something with the potential to change everything. But why hide it? And what did Phase 2 mean? "Is this what we were looking for?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik was silent for a moment, his fingers hovering over the console. "I don't know yet, but this is no ordinary weapon. This is something else. Something bigger." "Then we need to find it," Sarah replied, her tone steely. "If we don't, the Zorak will find it before us. And then it's over." Malik nodded and began pulling up more data, but just as his fingers brushed the display, a sudden noise echoed from deep within the ship, a scraping sound that made Sarah's heart leap in her chest. "Did you hear that?" Lieutenant Jasmine asked, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Sarah held up a hand, signaling for everyone to be quiet. The noise came again, this time louder. It was coming from below, beneath the floor of the bridge. "Everyone, back to the airlock," Sarah ordered, her voice sharp. "Now." But as they turned to leave, the ship's lights flickered once more, and then nothing. Complete darkness. "Damn it," Sarah muttered under her breath, her hand flashing to the flashlight on her belt. The others followed suit, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive blackness. The sound grew louder, closer. The scraping noise was unmistakable now. Something was moving beneath them. Sarah's heart raced. She knew this was no ordinary ship. Someone, or something, had been left behind, and it wasn't ready to be forgotten. Suddenly, the floor beneath their feet rumbled. It felt like the entire ship shifted on its axis. Something was alive down here. And it was angry. Before Sarah could react, the lights flashed back on, revealing a horrifying sight. The walls were covered in strange, alien symbols, some of which seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. These symbols were etched into the walls of the ship, as though they had been carved in a hurry, almost like a warning. "Get out. Now," Sarah shouted. As they sprinted back down the hall, they were stopped in their tracks by a sound that made their blood run cold. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, coming from the direction they had just followed. And then, the unmistakable sound of metal scraping on metal. Something was coming for them. Something far worse than they had imagined. The air on the ship felt heavier now, charged with a sense of impending doom. Sarah's team moved cautiously, their weapons drawn, but their every step seemed to echo unnervingly loud in the stillness of the abandoned vessel. The slow, deliberate footsteps they had heard earlier still rang in their minds, a constant reminder that they were not alone. Sarah motioned for her crew to take cover behind the bulkheads as they reached the junction that led to the lower decks. She peered around the corner, her heart racing, but there was no sign of anything or anyone. The corridors ahead were eerily quiet. "Did anyone see anything?" she whispered. "No, Captain. It's like they vanished," Malik responded, scanning the area with his eyes narrowed, trying to catch a glimpse of movement. He was visibly tense, the unease of the crew palpable. "We have to move," Sarah said firmly, her voice steady, though her mind raced. They had no time to waste. Every second they spent searching this derelict ship was a second the enemy could use to catch up. The Zorik fleet could be right on their tail, and they didn't have the luxury of playing detective. She turned back to the group and led them down a narrow, twisting hallway. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and the deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken with a sense of something ancient. They had all heard the rumors, the stories of lost human colonies, of ships that had disappeared without a trace. But this was something far beyond any legend. The scraping sound they had heard earlier was still faint, but it was unmistakably close now. It was as if something, or someone, was dragging itself along the floor, just out of sight. The crew's tension was rising. Every instinct told them to hurry, to find what they had come for, and get out of there before whatever was lurking below found them first. But Sarah knew they couldn't leave without uncovering the truth. There was something too important about this place to just turn away. As they made their way through the dimly lit corridors, the ship's systems flickered again, and the lights went out for a moment, plunging them into darkness. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Something was definitely coming for them. And whatever it wasn't human. Sarah held up her hand, signaling for everyone to stop. The tension was unbearable. The sound of scraping, the soft shuffle of movement, seemed to circle them now, as if something invisible was closing in from all sides. Every instinct screamed at Sarah to leave, to retreat, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not when they were so close. Just as the fear was about to boil over, the lights flickered back on, but what they saw froze them all in place. The walls were covered in blood-red markings, glowing faintly, as if the ship itself was alive. An ancient warning, a mark of something far older than anything they'd encountered. The crew members exchanged nervous glances. This was more than just a lost ship. It was a grave. "Captain, look," Malik whispered, his voice trembling as he pointed toward the end of the hallway. In the shadows, they saw it. A figure. Its form was hunched, unnatural, as if its body had been twisted and reformed by something beyond comprehension. The being was covered in the same symbols that marked the ship, its face obscured by a grotesque mask of flesh and bone, held together by dark tendrils that writhed and moved on their own. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The air around them was still, deathly quiet. The only sound was the faint humming of the ship's failing systems. Then the figure moved. With unnatural speed, it lunged forward, and the crew scrambled into action. The air erupted into chaos as gunfire filled the corridor, but the creature seemed unaffected. It moved like liquid, twisting and reforming with every shot that missed, its body contorting in impossible ways. "Fall back," Sarah shouted, her voice sharp and urgent. She grabbed Malik's arm and pulled him back, urging the others to retreat. Now. They ran, their boots pounding against the metal floor, but it wasn't enough. The creature was fast, too fast. As they turned a corner, Sarah risked a glance back and saw the creature darting after them, its twisted form moving with terrifying speed. It was gaining on them. They needed to escape. Fast, to the bridge. Sarah barked. "We need to seal off the airlock and regroup. We'll figure this out together, but we have to survive first." The crew raced towards the bridge, but the ship seemed to be shifting around them, the lights flickering and the walls creaking as though the entire vessel itself was alive. They were trapped, surrounded by darkness, and a creature they couldn't begin to understand. "Captain," Malik panted as they ran. What the hell is that thing? And why is it here? Sarah's mind raced. They hadn't come this far to die on a ghost ship. There had to be an answer, and she would find it, no matter the cost. They finally reached the bridge, the door hissing open to reveal the empty, decaying control room. The crew immediately began sealing the doors, locking themselves inside. But the creature was still coming. They could hear its dragging steps, getting closer. Its presence was like a dark cloud closing in on them. Sarah stood at the center of the bridge, her thoughts whirling. They had found the key, the answers to everything. But now the real fight was just beginning, and the enemy they were about to face was far beyond anything they had ever encountered. The consequences of their discovery were only starting to unfold, and Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The atmosphere in the bridge was thick with tension. The lights flickered once more, casting long shadows across the darkened room. The creature's movements were growing closer, every scraping step on the metal floor like a death toll. Sarah stood by the control panel, her mind racing for a solution. She could feel the pressure mounting. There was no way out, not unless they understood what they were truly up against. "Captain, we need a plan," Malik said, his voice strained. He was at the weapons locker, loading the last of their ammunition into his rifle. "We can't just keep running." "I know, Malik," Sarah replied, her voice tight with worry. She glanced at the screens, but the ship's systems were a mess. Damaged, ancient, and barely functional. None of it made sense. They were so close to understanding what had happened here. But the truth was slipping away with every passing second. Then, a sudden realization struck her. There was something important, something vital, about this ship, about the creature, and the strange markings that were all over the walls. This wasn't just some abandoned vessel. It was a warning, a message. The creature, it wasn't some random alien predator. It had been here for a reason. She rushed over to a nearby terminal and activated it, the screen flickering to life. It displayed fragmented files, encrypted data scattered across various systems. Most of it was corrupted, but something caught her eye. An ancient map showing the layout of the ship. The design was nothing like any human or alien vessel they had encountered before. "This ship, it's a prison," Sarah muttered under her breath, staring at the map. "A prison? For who?" Malik asked, stepping closer. "The creature, the thing chasing us. It was meant to guard something. Something powerful, something ancient." Her finger hovered over the screen, pointing to a section of the map that was clearly sealed off. This ship was built to contain it. The realization hit them all at once. The creature wasn't the real threat. It was just the guard, the keeper. The real danger was whatever lay hidden in the sealed section of the ship. And if that thing ever escaped, it would mean the end for everyone. "Captain, we need to stop this thing before it gets out," said Natalie, one of the crew members, her face pale. She had seen the fear in Sarah's eyes, and now it was mirrored in her own. But Sarah wasn't sure if they could stop it. They barely had the firepower to fend off the creature chasing them, let alone whatever was locked away in the ship's deepest, most dangerous level. "We don't have time to waste," she said, making a decision. "We need to get to the containment zone, lock it down, and prevent whatever it is from being unleashed." Without another word, she moved to the control panel, punching in the codes they had scavenged from the terminal. The ship creaked and groaned, as though protesting every effort they made to regain control. The lights flickered again, and the loud scrape of the creature's footsteps seemed to grow louder, closer. "I don't think we have much time," Malik said, glancing nervously toward the door. "That thing is getting closer. We have to move now." Sarah nodded and grabbed her weapon. "Let's go. Stay close and watch each other's backs." The crew moved quickly, slipping through the narrow, twisting corridors of the ship. Every sound, every movement in the shadows seemed to send them into a frenzy. The darkness pressed in around them, as though the ship itself was alive and closing in on them, forcing them forward. As they neared the containment area, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew colder, more suffocating. The faint hum of the ship's failing systems was replaced by an unnatural silence. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Captain, look," Malik said, his voice shaking. Ahead, the doors to the containment zone loomed, but they were not closed. They were slightly ajar, the darkness within thick and impenetrable. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. This was it. They had reached the heart of the ship. And whatever lay behind those doors was not meant to be disturbed. But it was too late to turn back now. "Get ready," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. "On my signal, we enter. Stay sharp." The crew gathered their courage as they approached the open door. Sarah's hand hovered over the control panel, her fingers trembling slightly. She hesitated for a moment. She knew whatever lay inside could be worse than anything they had encountered so far. But there was no turning back. She pressed the button, and the doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. The room beyond was dimly lit, the air thick with dust, and the faint smell of something decayed. They stepped into the room, weapons raised, eyes scanning the shadows, and that's when they saw it. In the center of the room, suspended in a large containment field, was a massive, pulsating orb. It was covered in strange, iridescent patterns, glowing with an eerie light. The creature, the Guardian, was nowhere to be seen. But the moment Sarah laid eyes on the orb, she felt a shift in the air. The entire room seemed to tremble, and the low hum of the containment field grew louder. Something inside the orb was stirring. And that was when Sarah realized the truth. The creature wasn't guarding the orb. It was a warning, a last line of defense to keep the universe safe from what was inside. The orb held something far more dangerous than anything they had ever faced. It was alive, and it was waking up. The room trembled as Sarah's mind raced. The orb in front of her seemed to hum with a power she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The strange, iridescent patterns on its surface pulsed, shifting, as though it were alive. The air grew heavier, and the temperature seemed to drop. "Get back," Sarah shouted, grabbing Malik's arm and yanking him away from the orb. But it was already too late. The containment field crackled, its energy sparking as the orb began to vibrate more intensely. The glowing patterns swirled faster, and Sarah could feel a deep, oppressive force in the room, like something ancient and powerful was awakening from a long slumber. "Captain, what's happening?" Nadely's voice trembled, her eyes locked on the orb, as if it had some hypnotic pull. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. She was frozen in place, staring at the orb with a sense of dread sinking deeper into her chest. The creature, the one they had been running from, had been guarding this very thing. But why? What was inside? The answer came too late, in a sudden, violent burst. With a deafening sound like the cracking of the universe itself, the orb split open. The containment field flickered and shorted out, sparks flying from the damaged equipment. A low, guttural growl echoed from within the orb, so deep and primal it felt as though the sound itself was vibrating in Sarah's bones. From the shattered orb, a shadow began to emerge. It wasn't a creature, not in the way they had expected. It was something far worse, a mass of darkness, swirling, shifting, and constantly changing shape. But as it took form, Sarah could make out a single figure, tall, imposing, with eyes glowing a fiery red. And in that moment, Sarah realized the truth. This wasn't just any alien force. This was an ancient, sentient being, one that had been imprisoned for eons. Its very existence was the reason why no fleet had ever dared to challenge the species guarding it. This was the thing that had wiped out civilizations long before humanity had ever risen. The figure's eyes locked onto Sarah, and a chill ran through her body. It didn't just see her, it understood her. And as the figure began to move toward them, the room shook violently. The power it emanated was unbearable. "Run," Sarah screamed, the words almost caught in her throat. But it was already too late. The creature moved faster than they could react, its movements more fluid than anything they had seen before. It didn't just walk. It moved through the space, bending reality itself as if it were nothing. The crew scattered in every direction, but no matter how fast they moved, the creature was always one step ahead. Its presence filled the room, blocking off every exit. Malik fired his weapon, but the bullets barely slowed the figure. The creature's form rippled, as though the bullets passed through it without causing any harm. It was invincible, but why? Sarah's mind raced. There had to be something. Anything they could do to stop this. The weaponry on the ship was useless against such an entity, but as her thoughts spun, a new realization struck her. The orb, the containment field. They weren't just keeping the creature inside. They were keeping it contained. The force holding it back had been slowly weakening, and now it was free. She grabbed Malik's arm, her pulse pounding. "We need to stop it. We have to get back to the core." "Are you insane?" Malik shouted, his eyes wide with panic. "We can't fight it. We can't even touch it." "We don't need to fight it," Sarah said, her voice cold with determination. "We need to trap it again. We need to lock it away before it gets out of control." But the creature, now fully awakened, wasn't giving them the chance. It glided toward them with terrifying speed, its form stretching and pulling like liquid darkness. It reached out, and Sarah barely managed to dive to the side, her heart hammering in her chest. "Captain!" Natalie screamed, but the voice was drowned out by a sound so loud, it felt like it was shattering her very soul. The creature roared, its form expanding outward as if to swallow everything in its path. Desperation rose in Sarah's chest. They needed to get to the core, but how? They couldn't outrun it, and fighting it wasn't an option. That's when she saw the ship's central control panel, the one she had tried to access earlier, flicker to life. It wasn't much, just a small patch of surviving circuitry, but it was enough to give her a faint glimmer of hope. She grabbed Malik's arm again. "We have to go now," she ordered, pulling him toward the control room. But as they moved, the creature reacted, its eyes locking onto Sarah, as though it could read her thoughts. With a flick of its wrist, it sent a burst of energy flying toward them. Sarah felt the force of it slam into her, sending her flying across the room. Her vision blurred as she crashed into the wall, the world spinning. Through the haze of pain, she saw the creature approaching. It was too close. And then something unexpected happened. From deep within the ship, a deep rumbling began. The lights flickered one last time, then shut off completely. The ship groaned and shuddered as though it was alive, fighting back against the creature. In that moment, Sarah realized the truth. This ship wasn't just a prison. It was a weapon that had been lying dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. And now, that moment had come. The fight for survival was just beginning.